Have you ever felt like your life has spiraled out of control, as if someone took the wheel without telling you? One day everything seems stable, and the next you find yourself in a narrow corridor, with closed doors, unanswered questions, and a heavy silence. And it is precisely there that the most dangerous doubt of all is born. If God is good, why does He allow certain things to happen? If God is sovereign, why does the path seem so confusing? And if God is truly in control, why does it hurt so much? Charles Spurgeon essentially said that true faith is not a comfortable emotion, but an anchor cast into the unseen. God's providence is not a detail of theology. It is the secret structure that sustains every second of your history. Even when you don't understand, even when you don't see, even when you don't feel, God has not lost control. The hand that governs the universe does not tremble, does not get distracted, does not lag behind. And this is deeper than it seems, because many people believe in God, but still live as if they were alone when night falls. The problem is that we want a God who explains everything, but God often prefers to form someone who trusts without explanation. We want a God who delivers us from every fall, but God often chooses to sustain us during our falls, so that we learn that our lives don't depend on the ground. There are times when providence seems harsh, almost severe, as if heaven were silent and distant. But God's silence is not abandonment, it's a method. The delay is not negligence, it's a work in progress. Can you accept that? Can you continue obeying when there are no signs, when there are no applause, when there is no immediate answer? Spurgeon would remind us that the God of the Bible is not a distant observer. He is the Lord who guides. He doesn't watch history from afar. He writes history from within. The difference between someone who survives and someone who crumbles is not the absence of problems, but the certainty that there is a higher government above the chaos. When you don't see that government, pain becomes a final sentence. But when you recognize that God is present, pain becomes a path, not a destination. This is where Joseph's life comes in as an unforgiving mirror. Joseph is not a romantic character. He is living proof that God's favor doesn't prevent the storm. Divine providence doesn't make life easy. It gives life direction, and direction is rarer than comfort. You may lose your footing, but you don't lose your purpose. You may be thrown into a valley, but you haven't been thrown out of God's plan. That changes everything. Because when you understand that, the question stops being, why is this happening to me? And becomes, what is God building in me through this? Now think honestly, if God has already written the ending, why does He allow certain beginnings to be so difficult? Why does humiliation come before honor? Why does oblivion come before recognition? Why does injustice come before exaltation? The human heart wants shortcuts, but God works with depth. God doesn't just take you to a place. He transforms you into someone capable of remaining in that place without losing your soul. And this means that some phases are not punishment, they are training. Some losses are not defeat, they are pruning. Some delays are not closed doors, they are protection. God's providence is not always gentle. Sometimes it is like a sword that silently cuts away what destroys you. Sometimes it is like a furnace that burns away the pride that would cause you to fall when the good day arrives. And here is a question few dare to answer. If God gave you everything you ask for today, would you have the maturity to endure it? Or would your own victory become your ruin? Providence is not just about what God does around you. It's about what God does within you while the world understands nothing. So, before we talk about Joseph's valleys, before we delve into the pain of rejection, betrayal, injustice, and waiting, you need to hold on to this truth tightly. Your life is not adrift. You are not a piece of wood carried by the current. You are not an accident of time. You are in the hands of the God who reigns, and when He guides, even what seems like delay can be direction. And even when providence seems frowning, it is leading you to an end that will not be shame, but glory. And now comes the detail that makes everything more serious. If this is real, then what happens when providence uses precisely the people closest to you to pave the way for pain? And what if the first blow doesn't come from outside, but from within your own home? There is a pain that doesn't come from a distant enemy. It's born too close. It's not the blow from a stranger on the street. It's the silence of a brother in the living room. It's not the persecution of someone who doesn't know you. It's the rejection of someone who knows your name. Everyone understands what it's like to face problems outside the home, but few are ready for the weight of suffering that begins within their own home. It's that strange atmosphere in the air, that conversation that stops when you arrive, that sideways glance, the feeling that you've become a nuisance simply by existing. You haven't done anything so serious, you haven't committed a crime, you haven't destroyed anyone. Even so, you feel like you don't belong, and the question remains stuck in your throat. Why has the place where I should be protected become the place where I am wounded? The story of Joseph comes in precisely at this point, because it doesn't begin with palaces. It begins with a young heart exposed to the worst kind of storm, the emotional storm that forms within the family. Jacob's house was a chaotic environment, marked by old rivalries, accumulated wounds, and a fragile structure. And when there is disorder in love, envy finds room to grow. Jacob loved Joseph more than the others and didn't hide it. It seems small, but this detail is like a match next to gasoline. When a father treats one son as a favorite, the others don't see affection, they see injustice. And the problem is that envy never presents itself as envy. It disguises itself as a sense of justice. It pretends to be defending balance, when in reality it is defending wounded pride. Joseph receives a special, colorful, different tunic. That tunic wasn't just clothing. It was a visible symbol, a daily reminder, a sign that he occupied a place that others wanted. Imagine what that generates in a house where tension already exists. Imagine what happens when someone already feels less seen, less valued, less loved. Every time Joseph appears in that tunic, he's not just entering the room. He's igniting the anger of someone who feels overshadowed. And here comes the most dangerous part. Joseph dreams. And these aren't ordinary dreams. They are visions of the future. He sees beams of water bowing before him. He sees stars bending, as if the heavens were saying that one day he would be lifted above his brothers. And he tells them, this is where the story becomes truly human, because Joseph is young, and youth mixes sincerity with recklessness. He doesn't measure the impact. He doesn't calculate the effect. He simply speaks. And what was meant to be a promise becomes a provocation. The dream was from God, but his brothers hear it as an affront. That's how it works. Sometimes you carry something divine within you, but the people around you interpret it as a threat. From then on, the house becomes a minefield. The text makes it clear. They could no longer speak to him peacefully. This seems simple, but in real life, it's devastating. It's when you try to start a conversation and no one answers. You ask a question and receive a hum. You enter and the atmosphere cools. You smile and no one smiles back. You feel tolerated, not loved. And worse, you have nowhere to run, because it's your home. Joseph experienced this, and this corrodes a young person's mind from the inside, because the body is at the table but the heart is in exile. Then comes the unexpected twist when no one still believes things will get better. The brothers see Joseph from afar, and don't think about talking to him. They think about eliminating him. They conspire to kill their own blood. This is the frightening part, because it reveals how far the human heart can go when envy matures. They call Joseph the dreamer, as if his gift were an offense, and the phrase is cold. Let's see what happens with his dream, as if killing the dreamer were killing the dream, as if erasing a person could erase a divine purpose. Joseph is thrown into an empty cistern. There's no water, there's no way out, and the cruelest detail is what his brothers do afterward. They sit down to eat, as if nothing were happening, as if Joseph's despair down there was just noise. This kind of cruelty exists even today. It just changes its clothes. It's when someone is falling apart and the other pretends not to see. It's when someone asks for help and receives indifference. It's when someone cries and the atmosphere continues as if it were normal. The soul learns there that rejection doesn't shout, it ignores. And when it seems the worst has already been done, a second, even darker twist emerges. They decide to sell Joseph. They turn their brother into merchandise. He becomes a price and exchange value, a body with a price tag. While Joseph pleads, they calculate their profit. And here the mystery of providence begins to appear as something uncomfortable. Because if God is guiding, why does the path lead through such absurd cruelty? Why does the route of purpose cross through betrayal? Why does God's plan seem to walk on ground that men have soaked in sin? The brothers still lie to their father, tearing his tunic, staining it with blood, and offering it as proof of death. And Jacob collapses. The home is in mourning, but it's a mourning based on a lie. Joseph disappears. The father suffers. The brothers move on with their lives. And heaven remains silent. But there's one phrase that doesn't change, even when everything changes. God was with him. That's the hardest part to accept. God was with Joseph at the pit. God was with Joseph when he was sold. God was with Joseph when he was stripped of his own identity. And now he's going to Egypt not as a victor, but as a slave. The question that remains is simple and dangerous. If God was with him, what else can happen from now on? When Joseph crossed the borders of Egypt, he didn't enter a new country. He entered a new logic. Egypt didn't just need arms. It needed usefulness. There, a man's dignity was measured by the function he could fulfill, not by the name he carried. And that's how life works in many places even today. You're only valued as long as you produce. You're only noticed as long as you deliver results. You only receive respect as long as you maintain performance. For Joseph, this change wasn't a theory. It was the shock of being reduced to a strong, young, marketable body, with a price set by hands that asked nothing about his history. There's a silent detail in this kind of pain. It's not just what was taken from you. It's that you begin to doubt yourself. Joseph didn't just lose his home. He lost the reference point of who he was. He no longer had his father nearby. He no longer had his brothers. He no longer had the tunic that identified him. He only had his own heart. And the heart, when wounded, can become a dangerous place. It is at this point that many collapse because they realize that exile is not just geographical. Exile is internal. It's when you are surrounded by people and yet you feel alone, when your soul thinks, well, maybe I'm nothing after all. But the text suggests something few notice. Joseph did not become hardened. He did not turn into a bitter version of himself. He did not turn to ashes. God's presence in him did not prevent him from being a slave, but it prevented him from being destroyed from within. Spurgeon would say that there is a type of victory that no one applauds, the victory of remaining upright when no one is watching. Joseph's first great battle in Egypt was not administrative. It was invisible. It was about surviving without losing his sense of God. He was far from home, but he was not far from the Lord. Have you ever noticed how certain losses don't just try to steal things, but your faith? Have you noticed how suffering sometimes doesn't just want to hurt you, but to convince you that God has forgotten you? What if the real purpose of the valley is to alter your identity before altering your destiny? Over time, Joseph grows in Potiphar's household. And here comes an important turning point. God blesses his work in such an evident way that even the Egyptian notices. The household prospers, the administration improves, order is established. Joseph becomes a central figure, reliable, respected. This may seem like a relief, but it is precisely there that danger approaches. The enemy doesn't always attack when you are weak. Sometimes he attacks when you are beginning to improve, because nothing awakens hell more than seeing someone rebuilding themselves. Potiphar's wife looks at Joseph, and that look is not neutral. It has intention. First he observes, then he desires, then he tries to take. Temptation doesn't appear as something grotesque. It appears as something that seems to offer rest. Joseph was young, alone, living with a daily burden, carrying deep wounds. An inner voice might say, "No one will know. You deserve a break. This might ease your pain. It won't change anything." This is the most common poison, the idea that a small deviation can be used as anesthesia. But temptation never delivers anesthesia without demanding the soul's toll. She doesn't beat around the bush. She says, "Lie with me." Direct, repeated, insistent. And here's a perspective that changes the reading. Joseph wasn't tempted only by pleasure. He was tempted by the shortcut, because sin often is a proposition for control. It's as if it were saying, since your life was taken from you, at least take this back. It's a false recovery of power, a gesture that seems like freedom, but is disguised imprisonment. Do you think sin is merely a moral failing, or is it a strategic trap to destroy the future before it arrives? Do you understand that some temptations don't come to give you pleasure, but to throw you off balance? And what if the most dangerous proposition isn't to make you fall, but to make you think that falling is normal? Joseph resists, and he resists intelligently. He doesn't play with limits. He avoids the environment. He flees. This is rare because many people want to fight temptation as if it were a rational argument, but temptation doesn't respect logic when it encounters desire. Joseph understands something that few accept. There are battles you don't win by confronting, you win by escaping. And there are times when fleeing is not cowardice, it's wisdom. Then comes the most unexpected blow. When temptation fails, it changes its language. The frustrated desire becomes accusation. The door that seemed to offer pleasure now opens the way to injustice. Joseph is accused and punished for doing what is right. This confuses anyone. It's the kind of situation that makes many give up on being righteous. Because the mind thinks, if I do what is right and I'm imprisoned, then what's the advantage of obeying? This question is a spiritual crossroads. It separates those who love God from those who only love God's benefits. And here is the hardest revelation. Faithfulness doesn't shield you from pain. It prepares you to go through it without rotting inside. Joseph loses his freedom, but he doesn't lose his conscience. He leaves the scene with his clothes in the accuser's hand, but with his soul intact before God. Spurgeon would call this true wealth, because the world can take many things from you, but it cannot take away what God has established within you. Why didn't God intervene before the arrest? Why did heaven allow the lie to gain strength for a while? What if the next phase of the story isn't about immediate deliverance, but about the 13 years of silence that shape a man capable of carrying a greater destiny? Joseph's imprisonment wasn't just a change of location, it was a change of pace, as if life had been reduced to walls, keys, and repeated days. What destroys a person most, there isn't the iron on the door, but the thought that grows in the darkness. I did the right thing and ended up here. That phrase, when it enters the mind, becomes a slow poison. Because unjust suffering doesn't just wound the flesh. It tries to rewrite your vision of God. It tries to convince you that faithfulness is useless, that obedience doesn't pay off, that heaven doesn't care. And it's precisely at this point that Joseph's story becomes most impressive, because the text doesn't say he was just imprisoned. It says that, even imprisoned, he was accompanied. There's a curious and improbable fact about this. Joseph enters as an accused and shortly after becomes someone trustworthy within the prison. This doesn't happen to just anyone. Those who arrive unjustly usually become resentful, bitter, aggressive, and distrustful. Not Joseph. He moves in the opposite direction. Instead of becoming hardened, he becomes stable. Instead of ceasing to serve, he serves more. It's as if within him there exists a center that the prison cannot reach, and this center has a name: the presence of God. Spurgeon would say that divine grace does something the world doesn't understand. It transforms the place of humiliation into a school of greatness. And here comes an unlikely twist. Even behind bars, Joseph begins to lead. The jailer places responsibilities in his hands. This is strange because prison is a place where trust dies. But when God is with someone, even the distrust of men is overcome by something greater. Joseph begins to organize, manage, care for, and advise. And the most curious thing is that he does this without knowing that he is being trained to govern a nation. The prison becomes a rehearsal for the palace. The cell becomes a leadership laboratory. And the silence, which seems like punishment, becomes preparation. Then something even more unexpected happens. Two important men arrive at the prison, the Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. They are not ordinary criminals. They are people connected to the center of power. And one night they have disturbing dreams. The detail is that dreams in the Bible never appear by chance. They always announce movement. When dreams come into play, heaven is signaling that gears have begun to turn. Joseph observes the sadness on their faces and asks why. This is revealing. He is imprisoned, but remains sensitive to others. He has reasons to live closed off from others, but chooses to see the suffering of others. Joseph interprets the dreams with precision. One is restored, the other is condemned. And when the cupbearer is released, Joseph makes a simple request: remember me. It's a human, direct, almost desperate plea, as if to say, I just need a chance. The feeling at that moment is that the door will finally open. But then an improbable, almost cruel event occurs. The cupbearer leaves and forgets. He returns to the routine of the palace, resumes his life, and Joseph is left behind as if he had never existed. 2 years pass. 2 years of silence. 2 years without explanation. 2 years in which the heart could rot. Here's a curious fact that changes perception. Joseph had already endured 13 years of trials from the time he left his father's house until he was exalted. 13 years is enough time for someone to lose hope many times over. If you add it all up, he was sold at 17 and would only be exalted at 30. In that interval, he went through the pit, the slave market, Potiphar's house, the false accusation, imprisonment, and oblivion. And yet the text insists on the same reality. God did not leave his side. God did not interrupt the work. God did not break the plan. Providence was not at a standstill. It was slow in human eyes, but it was precise in divine timing. And here the story takes on even greater weight. Because there is a type of suffering that is not an explosion, it is repetition. It's not a bad day, it's a long sequence. It's not a single blow, it's an entire season. Joseph didn't just face difficult moments, he faced a prolonged cycle of waiting. And waiting is a rare test. It reveals whether you love the promise or love the God who made the promise. It shows whether you obey only when there are signs, or whether you obey when there is silence. It separates real faith from fleeting enthusiasm. The final twist begins unexpectedly. The Pharaoh dreams, and his dreams are strong, strange, symbolic. The most powerful man in Egypt wakes up restless as if he had touched a shadow of the future. He summons wise men and experts, but no one can explain it. The palace, which always had answers, is left without answers. And this is a biblical pattern. When God decides to act, he shows the world that human control is limited. The Pharaoh has authority, wealth, and an army, but no interpretation. He has a throne, but no peace. It is at that exact moment that the cupbearer's memory returns like a shock. There's a man in prison, a forgotten man, hidden, invisible, but ready. Joseph is summoned urgently. He leaves the prison, shaves, changes his clothes, and enters before Pharaoh. And the scene is absurd. In a few hours, a prisoner is before the most powerful throne of the time. But here is the most profound detail. Joseph doesn't arrive there as a vengeful man, nor as a desperate one. He arrives as someone who has learned to wait. He arrives as someone who has been broken without being destroyed. And that makes all the difference. What seemed like a delay was preparation. What seemed like forgetfulness was positioning. And what seemed like imprisonment was merely the corridor before the door opened. Joseph enters the palace as if still carrying the smell of prison on his skin. Hours before, he was behind bars, forgotten, treated like a number. Now he stands before Pharaoh, surrounded by gold guards, silence, and gazes that measure his every move. It's as if time has suddenly accelerated, as if life has pressed an invisible button and changed the scene without asking permission. But this change, however rapid it may seem, is not luck. It is the exact point where providence reveals itself forcefully. And here arises the first tension. Joseph knows that he is not just standing before a king. He is facing a test that will decide his future in a few minutes. The Pharaoh describes unsettling dreams, strange images that won't leave his mind. Strong cows devoured by thin cows, full ears of corn swallowed by withered ears. The kind of vision that makes anyone uncomfortable, because it seems to announce something bigger than life itself. The entire palace has already tried to interpret it and failed. And when Egypt cannot explain it, power loses control. The greatest authority in the ancient world is now vulnerable, waiting for an answer from a former slave. This contrast is too improbable to be a coincidence. It's as if God were saying, "I choose the weak to confound the strong." Then Joseph speaks. But before speaking, he establishes something that changes the atmosphere of the room. He makes it clear that the answer doesn't come from him. He points to God. This is risky, because in the face of a king who considers himself almost divine, affirming that there is a God above all is dangerous. Joseph could try to impress. He could use the moment to sell himself. He could pretend to be a rare genius. But he does the opposite. He doesn't take the glory for himself. He places the glory in God. And this gesture reveals that imprisonment didn't transform him into someone desperate for validation. It transformed him into someone who knows who governs. The interpretation is clear and, at the same time, frightening. 7 years of extreme abundance will come. Then will come 7 years of famine so severe that the abundance will be forgotten. Egypt will experience 2 extremes, and the second extreme will crush the first. This is the revelation that changes everything. It's not just a warning, it's a map of the future. And here's the twist. Joseph doesn't just deliver the meaning of the dream, he delivers a complete plan. He says what must be done, with strategy, organization, and urgency. Store food, build granaries, manage with discipline. Prepare the country to save not only Egypt, but the world around it. This is the moment when the palace realizes something it didn't expect. Joseph is not just someone with a spiritual gift. He is someone with practical vision. He is not just an interpreter of dreams. He is a crisis manager. And this is a rare combination. Spirituality with intelligence, faith with planning, dependence on God with human responsibility. Pharaoh looks around and understands the obvious. If there is a man capable of leading this project, he is standing before him now. And then the unthinkable happens. Instead of sending Joseph back to prison with a symbolic reward, Pharaoh raises him above everyone else. He places authority in the hands of a man who had nothing. The prisoner becomes governor. The foreigner becomes leader. The forgotten one becomes essential. The change is so great that it seems unreal. But that's exactly how God's intervention happens in certain stories. It's not slow, it's decisive. God doesn't just pull Joseph out of the hole. God changes his position in the world. And the tension here doesn't lessen. It increases because a new question arises. Will Joseph, after suffering so much, now use power as a weapon? Will he harden his heart? Will he take revenge on life? Because there is a hidden danger in all exaltation. The heart that has suffered can grow cold when it rises. The years of plenty begin, and the text suggests an almost breathtaking scene. Gigantic harvests, absurd abundance, Egypt storing so much that it's impossible to count. Joseph manages with precision. Each granary is a bulwark against the future. Each sack of grain is a life-saving decision, while the world around him lives as if it were eternal. Joseph works as one who knows what's coming. And this brings a simple lesson. When God reveals something, he doesn't reveal it to generate fear, but to generate preparation. Heaven doesn't show the future to paralyze. It shows it to position us. Then the 7 years of famine arrive as a shock. Suddenly the land dries up. The food disappears, people panic. Nations search for answers. And the reversal is complete. Egypt, which was once just another kingdom, becomes the only hope for survival. People from everywhere come seeking food. And here is the most powerful detail. The man who saved the world in that crisis is the same one who was sold as merchandise years before. The world now depends on a man who was once treated like garbage. This irony is profound. And it shows that God's providence not only reverses situations, it transforms humiliation into purpose. At this point, the story could already end happily. But it doesn't, because the greatest tension is still to come. There is an encounter that could destroy everything from within. There is a past that still breathes. And when hunger strikes, the first to appear in the governor's path are not strangers. They are the faces of the past. They are the men who threw him into the pit. The same ones who sold him. The same ones who lied. The same ones who went on with their lives as if he were dead. They arrive without imagining who he is. They enter Egypt seeking bread, but they carry an ancient guilt that has never been resolved. And now Joseph faces the most dangerous moment of his entire life. It's not the well. It's not the prison. It's not the seduction. It's this. Because now he has real power. Now he can pay back in kind. Now he can return everything. And the question that grips any attentive heart is simple and explosive. When providence places your enemies before you, what do you do with the power? Do you use it to hurt or to save? They enter Egypt hungry, dust on their faces, and haste in their hearts. They don't arrive as villains, but as men broken by necessity. And that's what makes everything more difficult. The past, when it returns, rarely comes back in the same form. Sometimes it returns weak, human, asking for help. Joseph is there at the center of power, with the authority to decide who lives and who falls. He doesn't need to raise his voice. He doesn't need to explain himself. One order is enough, and the destiny of those men changes forever. And in that instant, the whole world seems to disappear because now it's not about Egypt, it's not about granaries, it's not about global famine. It's about a question that weighs like a stone. What do you do when you have the power to return the pain you received? Joseph looks at them and recognizes each face. They don't recognize Joseph. And that's a silent and cruel twist. Because while they see only a governor, Joseph sees the well, the torn tunic, the hunger in his soul, the empty cistern, the day his life was sold. He could transform that encounter into human justice. He could prove that he won. He could humiliate them as he was humiliated. He could show that now it is they who bow down. He would have every reason to. And perhaps, if he were just an ordinary man, this would have already happened. But Joseph is not just someone who suffered. Joseph is someone who was worked on by God. And what God does in a person's heart is greater than what people do to them. As the reunion progresses and the truth draws near, the brothers begin to tremble. Because conscience, even buried for years, does not die. It sleeps but awakens when the past touches the present. They remember what they did. They feel fear. They imagine revenge. And it is at this point that Jose decides to reveal who he is. The scene is intense because it is not just a revelation of identity. It is a revelation of destiny. It is as if he were saying, I am living proof that you could not erase me. But what happens next is the real miracle. Joseph doesn't explode in hatred. He doesn't demand anything. He doesn't destroy. He weeps. He speaks firmly, but with mercy. He tells them not to despair, not to hate each other, because God was guiding everything for the preservation of life. This phrase changes everything, because Joseph isn't denying their wickedness. He isn't pretending it was petty. He isn't romanticizing the trauma. He is showing a higher perspective. You did evil, but God took that evil and transformed it into a path for a greater good. And then comes the phrase that runs through history like a blade of light. You intended evil against me, but God turned it into good. This doesn't mean that evil turned into good. It means that God's goodness is so sovereign that it can govern even chaos without losing control. Evil tried to destroy Joseph, but it became a bridge. Suffering tried to crush Joseph, but it became preparation. Injustice tried to imprison Joseph, but it became a stance. This is the point that needs to enter your heart today. What hurt you has no power to define your ending. If God is in your story, the last word will not belong to the pit, nor to betrayal, nor to abandonment, nor to delay. The last word will belong to the Lord. And now comes the practical aspect, because this isn't just a pretty story. It's a direct call for you to live differently. First, stop interpreting your difficult phase as if it were the end. A valley isn't a sentence. Prison isn't eternal. Delay isn't defeat. Perhaps what seems like a delay is God preparing you so you don't lose your soul when the door opens. Second, make a clear choice. Don't build a monument of resentment. Joseph had children and gave them meaningful names, as if to say, I will not live with my life tied to what they did to me. You can do the same. You don't need to erase memories, but you need to stop feeding the poison. You don't control what they did to you, but you control what you will do with it. Third, understand that forgiveness is not saying it was right. Forgiveness is deciding that you will not be ruled by the past. It is choosing not to retaliate with the same harm. It is cutting the chain that binds your peace to someone's mistake. And that is not weakness. It is strength. Because revenge binds you to trauma. Forgiveness frees you for the future. You don't need to trust the person who hurt you again to forgive, but you need to forgive so you are not consumed from within. Fourth, transform your pain into maturity, and your maturity into service. Joseph wasn't raised up just to be well. He was raised up to save lives. When God heals and restores you, He wants you to become an answer for other people. Perhaps you went through what you went through so that your story has authority and your testimony has weight. Your pain can become a direction for those who are lost. Your valley can become a bridge for someone to cross. So, if you are in the midst of this process today, do one simple yet profound thing. Remain faithful. Keep doing what is right, even when no one is watching. Keep obeying even when the answer doesn't come quickly. Keep walking even with tears, because God is working for you, not against you. And when the right time comes, you will understand that not a single day of your struggle was wasted. If this message resonated with you, like the video now to strengthen its reach and help others. Comment on what you are experiencing or what you learned here, even anonymously if you prefer. And subscribe to the channel to receive future videos. Hugs, and may God strengthen you in this process.